Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this important conversation, Drawing the Lines, Redistricting in the Census, and thank you to Victory Institute for organizing this critical panel as part of this year's conference for bringing together such an incredible group of people for this discussion. Ohio Senator Nickie Antonio, Virginia Delegate Danica Roem, Raffi Freedman-Gurspan, the Deputy States Director for All on the Line, National Redistricting Action Fund, and the former Senior Associate Director for Public Engagement at the Obama White House, and a good friend of mine here in California, Paul Mitchell, the owner of Redistricting Partners and the Vice President of Political Data, Inc. My name is Tony Hoang, and I'm the Managing Director of Equality California, the nation's largest statewide LGBTQ+ civil rights organization, working to create a world that is healthy, just, and fully equal for all LGBTQ+ people. Part of that work involves collaborating with partners like Victory Institute to build a pipeline of LGBTQ+ leaders and increase representation for our community within government at the local, state, and federal levels. A decade ago, Equality California worked closely with our panelists Paul Mitchell and Redistricting Partners, and with LGBTQ+ organizations like Victory Institute to devise and implement a strategy to maximize the strength of the LGBTQ+ vote and the election of LGBTQ+ and pro-equality candidates across California. So I'd like to start the discussion by turning it over to Paul to give an overview of the redistricting process and how that process looks different in states across the country. Paul?
Thanks a lot, Tony, and thanks for having me. This is something that we at Redistricting Partners are really passionate about. As Tony mentioned, in 2011, we did some groundbreaking work to really identify in redistricting databases the LGBTQ community within different portions of the state. We went around the state looking for areas where we had densely populated LGBTQ communities and data that we could build around those. The idea was not only at the state level, but also at the local level to try to identify those locations where we could have an impact on the redistricting process. And it was incredibly effective. We have seen certain parts of the state in San Diego area, obviously in San Francisco, in Sacramento, Long Beach, communities where we've been able to work with the local governments that are doing redistricting or commissions and shape districts in a way to not crack the LGBTQ community into multiple districts, but to strengthen their voting power within one or two districts. The data that we're able to use is data some from the census. We're actually very hopeful there will be better data from the census this year, and I'm happy to talk about that. I had a little call with the census today regarding that data. And there's also just legal arguments around the LGBTQ community of interest that we had to make. We had to go to the State Redistricting Commission and say, here's data, and here's public testimony, and here's a history of discrimination and policies, and the real need, the backbone of a claim for the LGBTQ community to be considered a real strong community of interest. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that. So I'm happy to talk more about this as we get through this. I can't wait to hear from the other panelists, but there are real opportunities around the country to strengthen the voting power for the LGBTQ community for a decade.
Thank you, Paul. Next up, I want to turn it over to Raffi to talk about the work that All on the Line is doing to restore fairness to our democracy and to ensure every American has an equal say in our government. Raffi?
Yep. Hi, thanks, Tony, and to everyone on the panel. So great to be here. I am a Deputy States Director with the All on the Line campaign, and I oversee our work in the Midwest and on the East Coast. We are a national campaign to restore fairness to our democracy and to ensure that every American has an equal say in our government. We're on a mission to end gerrymandering because it contributes to the polarization and the dysfunction in our political system. We believe it is time to end map manipulation and finally have fair districts. We deserve accountable, responsive elected officials. And our campaign is driven by grassroots organizers all over the country who want to make sure that we actually have a lasting impact. And we're working on all kinds of intersecting issues, and in particular, thinking about issues that impact folks in their everyday lives. Of course, for our LGBTQ community, many of those issues are across issues around affordable care in healthcare, ending violence and discrimination, and making sure that the most vulnerable in our communities are protected. But we have to be able to do that if there is a fair process and really a fair playing field. And that means ending the manipulation of electoral maps. These maps have been drawn in the past by surgical precision to ensure that certain folks are getting their voices heard while others are not. And in particular for our community, we have seen map manipulation have drastic effects, including in North Carolina, the passage of HB2, the targeting of trans youth in places like Texas and Georgia, and of course the inability to pass non-discrimination protections in states like Arizona and Pennsylvania. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation as an LGBTQ advocate and to talk about why this is such an important issue for our community, and in particular, how LGBTQ elected officials, especially in legislatures, can really be champions on this issue of fairness in districts.
Thank you, Raffi. Our next two panelists will each have a role in redrawing the lines next year in critical swing states. First, let's start with Senator Nickie Antonio, who served in the House of Representatives during the redistricting process in Ohio 10 years ago, and will now be doing so again as a member of the Ohio Senate. Senator Antonio?
Well, thanks. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be a part of this panel with my colleagues. And redistricting and gerrymandered districts are especially an important topic all over the country, but especially in my state of Ohio. I serve in an incredibly gerrymandered district state where I serve in the very deep minority. And one of the things I think is important for us to think about are the consequences that come from gerrymandered districts. It serves no one well. When we have the extremes that we see on both sides, but certainly in my state, the balance of power is out of balance. There is not an imbalance of power. Ohio Republicans won just 52% of their congressional votes, but they retained 75% of Ohio's congressional districts. That's out of whack, and that's because of gerrymandered districts. They won 50% of our legislative votes, but maintained supermajorities in both legislative chambers. And when things are that far out of balance, it creates a situation where we have legislators that are choosing constituents instead of constituencies choosing their legislators and their representatives. And so this year around is going to be critical. The way we draw the districts was changed through referendum. An overwhelming majority of Ohioans said they want fair districts. And so that is a wonderful place for us to begin with. Fair districts mean fair policies for all the people in the state of Ohio, including those of us from the LGBTQ community.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, someone who's been an inspiration to so many of us in the LGBTQ plus community, Delegate Danica Roem is the first elected and seated transgender state legislator in the United States and will have a hand in Virginia's redistricting process next year. Delegate?
Thank you, Tony. And so just to correct one thing, I will not have a hand in anything regarding redistricting next year because we're going to a commission. And the issue that comes up with this is I had a problem with the way that the ballot initiative that was just approved by Virginia voters on November 3rd was designed in the first place, because while it allows 8 citizen members on this commission, which is great, and I'm really happy that we have citizen members who would be deciding, who their legislators should be, it allows 8 legislators to also be on that commission. And to me, legislators should have no role, zero whatsoever, in terms of picking their constituents, just as Senator Antonio was talking about, because it's an inherent conflict of interest. There's no way to spin it any other way. It is an inherent conflict of interest for us to be able to, pick the people who are supposed to be picking us. And so the way I guess I kind of see things going forward here is we need to make sure that the maps aren't just compact and contiguous, but actually keep communities of interest together as well. And that when we have these independent commissions, they need to reflect the racial diversity of the, basically the states that we live in, but also needs to represent other forms of diversity as well. Our commission has 0 LGBTQ members of the 8 legislators who are actually on it, for example. And, we only Democratic members will get to choose or I think we'll have, or I think it's actually like the judges or whatever, will get to choose 8 other commissioners, I'm not particularly hopeful that they're going to put any LGBTQ folks on there, for example. And so I believe that we have a lot of perspectives that are going to be missing, but at the same time, this is what the voters approved. And so what we have to then do is, what is the most equitable way that we can implement this policy? And at the same time, what can we do to improve the actual constitutional amendment so that by 2030, we have another shot?
Thank you, Delegate, and thank you for that clarification. So I think to open it up, I think the first question that I'll ask is, why is it important for the LGBTQ plus community to play a role in the redistricting process? And what opportunities do we have in states across the country to help draw lines the way that will help us advance LGBTQ plus equality?
Well, I'm happy to take a first stab at it, Tony, if you'd like. This cycle, we actually have a few tools that we didn't have in 2001 or 2011. The first is, as Delegate Danica Roem was saying, the commission process in a lot of states is taking the job away from the elected officials. And it's also happening in a lot of local governments where commissions are taking more charge of the redistricting process. And in California, we were actually able to have 2 of our 14 statewide redistricting commissioners are from the LGBTQ community. And the language of the policy to select delegates and draw districts expressly says that they should be considering communities of interest, like the language says race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and economic status. So those are actual conditions for drawing the lines. That is one big change that we've had around the country to varying degrees. The second and probably bigger, more important change is just the public perception and the media's perception and the media's ability to report on these issues. If you looked back in 2001, there were very few articles being written about redistricting because it was all being done, in back rooms, and reporters didn't understand it. They didn't have tools to do like a infographic on the newspaper's website to show the maps. But now you have a media corps that is very interested in digging into redistricting, on reporting about it. And so the LGBTQ community can utilize these tools to go essentially straight to the public, to bypass maybe even the elected officials that are drawing the lines. And in some cases, go directly to judges or other bodies that have been put in charge of the redistricting process. So we have some significant changes over the last couple decades that really create opportunities that just honestly weren't there in the past. And just like we saw with the LGBTQ community being involved in the census and making sure the population's counted, there's a real need to make sure that they're a part of this process. And like I'd said earlier, not just looking to make sure that we can create districts, say, that strengthen the LGBTQ community for a local government seat or for a legislative or congressional district, but also going in and making sure that they're not split up. We've looked at cities around the country, and you'll find some LGBTQ communities where a downtown area that has a strong population and a lot of data around it will be split into 3 council districts. And simply trying to avoid those gerrymandering of these core populations into separate districts and diluting their strength can be one real easy thing to go in and start looking at.
Yeah, and if I can, I just would love to jump in about what we're doing at All in the Line around organizing communities for that very reason, to engage in the different opportunities that each of the states is a little bit different of how they're actually going to have public comment for these map drawing, situations. But in general, what we're trying to do with our state directors in places just like Ohio and Arizona and other places is that we are trying to mobilize the communities, especially communities of interest, which we believe include the LGBTQ community, to talk about their stories about the impact redistricting has had in places like North Carolina. So we're making sure, of course, in this pandemic world, we're trying to figure out, just like everyone else, how for legislatures or for independent commissions, how they're going to take public comment in general. In the past, there has been written and in-person oral presentations. We hope that it will go to a friendly, safe way through devices like Zoom, or who knows what they will come up with. But what we're going to do, what we promise to do at All on the Line, is to make sure that we are organizing communities, in particular folks in BIPOC and LGBTQ communities throughout the country. And so I think that's part of it, is just like Paul was saying, is getting folks aware about the tools that are out there, and also about the credibility that we have as a community to say, we are a community of interest, do not split us. We have a story to tell about why gerrymandering hurts our communities.
And that's to me, that's the critical step in connecting the dots. And anytime that the effect of whether it's a policy or an action affects our community and other communities, the best response or the best affirmative action is to actually work in coalition. It's how I ended up getting elected to begin with. There's no way that that would have happened just with any small segment of the population. As the first and only person serving from the LGBTQ community in the legislature in Ohio. And so I see the same thing needing to happen around our communities with getting them to work together. They did do that when we had our referendum, and it wasn't perfect either in Ohio, but it gave us a step in the right direction. And I think it's the only way that people are even going to understand how much it affects them. The fact that the majority of the people in Ohio, when they're polled, say that they believe that a Fairness Act, LGBTQ protections should be offered to people in the state of Ohio, 71%, and yet we can't get it through the legislature because the legislature is not reflective of the communities that are served in the whole state of Ohio.
Thank you. Without a specific question collecting sexual orientation or gender identity on the 2020 census, how can we amplify the political power of LGBTQ plus people? Or more simply, without that data, how do we know where LGBTQ plus people live?
Well, the census does have a question, essentially. When you filled out the census, there's two types of census forms. There's the decennial census that we all filled out, and then there's the American Community Survey that goes to 1 out of every 6 households over the course of a decade. Both of these data collection methods do now allow for the identification of same-sex heads of household. So it's not the same as asking somebody their sexual orientation or their gender preference. It's about the two people who are the head of the household, both being male or both being female. And that is now a data point that can be utilized to serve either as a direct measure or kind of a proxy of where the LGBTQ communities are physically located. The American Community Survey data is based on a very large census tract area, which is maybe not as fine-tuned as you need to be able to do a lot of redistricting work. But the newer data from the decennial census, the idea is right now that data will be available at the census block group level. That's what we're expecting. And that it's going to be released in time for us to be able to utilize it for redistricting. We probably do need to have pressure be put on the Census Department to maybe make that data as granular as possible and to make it available as soon as possible so it can be maximized in its usage. And then like we'd seen before, there are other data points that you can use. The first district that was created in California that was expressly done to strengthen the voting power of the LGBTQ community was that district in San Diego where Toni Atkins, who's going to be speaking later tonight, where she was first elected. And that district was created utilizing the data from the centers, from the LGBT Health Center, and where its patient population was. And that was enough for them to kind of identify where that footprint was of the most densely populated LGBT population in the city of San Diego. And so there can be things in addition to the census that can be utilized. And we've seen that in California to use the census data in combination with other data points. And then honestly, in redistricting, it's the community input. It's people from the community saying, this is my area. literally drawing it on a map with community of interest mapping tools that are now available, and speaking before commissions to identify where that community of interest is. That is a powerful tool, and it's one that is even more strengthened in this environment, how we're going to be seeing redistricting being done this decade.
Okay, so if you represent a city, a large metropolitan area, a densely populated city, or a very particularly large suburban area, you might be able to have data where you can pinpoint that. Or as you were just hearing from Paul, you might be able to actually have LGBT health centers in the first place that actually exist in order to, find some sort of data point. But the whole point of individuals being able to speak up and speak out on this, if you represent the exurbs, if you represent a rural area, or if you live in those areas, if you represent or you live in an area where there isn't an LGBT health clinic for miles, and by miles I mean hundreds of miles, where you've never even met another out trans or out gay person in your life, or out bi person or anything, and you're the only one who you know of, that's tough. That's a lot. That's very hard. But geographically, that's most of America. Geographically speaking, not by population, but geographically, you are dealing with a very hard situation here where how are you supposed to identify those enclaves, right, of queer support? And at the same time, if you get too micro-targeted, you could risk outing someone who is not in a safe position to be outed in the first place. And so having people who will actually show up to redistricting events, who will actually show up in front and be willing to testify, that is so critical for people from our community to do, who are safe to be out in the first place, or safer, I should say, who can, express themselves, because they very well may be speaking for the entire community within their local community at that point, even though that's an unfair situation to ever have to be put in the first place, because even in Virginia, our 5 LGBTQ legislators, 2 voted for the redistricting amendment, 3 voted against it. So we are not a monolith, and people need to understand that. You look at Raffi's life story, you look at my life story, all trans women do not have the same life stories. We have very different backgrounds, and we come from different demographic groups and everything else that goes with it. So it's just something to be mindful of.
Well, and I think I think those considerations are really important when we go into this, that we have much to gain and to benefit from as an LGBTQ community in sort of the macro respect. But when you do get down into those micro levels, it may or may not be as advantageous for us. But ultimately, I think we do win because whether or not it's specific to LGBT folks being concentrated in one area versus just having a contiguous community, so that at least if I've made the decision as someone from the LGBTQ community to live in an area that I consider to be safe, welcoming, friendly, then I'm going to benefit from being in that district, and I'm going to benefit from hopefully having some like-minded folks around me that will, together with me, elect my representatives. And I think ultimately that's how we win.
So the Supreme Court recently heard arguments from the Trump-Pence administration asking to exclude undocumented immigrants from the court. What could this mean for states with sizable immigrant communities like Ohio or Virginia? And especially, what does that mean for LGBTQ plus immigrants themselves?
Well, I'll start. I mean, one of the biggest concerns we have about that, because we do have large immigrant populations, is that they're left out of the counting. And, the founders wanted people counted, period. Just count the people who are here. But what it means for us could mean the difference in losing a congressional seat. It can mean the difference in what kinds of federal dollars come to our communities through HUD dollars. I mean, there is so much on the line if we don't have a true accounting of the people who utilize the resources within that community, and then also for them to have representation. So it's I've actually heard, and Paul, I don't know if you have the answer to this for me, but I've been reading and listening to the fact that there may be an opportunity to continue the count in a new administrative cycle. I don't know whether that's possible or not, because there are questions about whether the count should have been stopped when it was. I think an honest count of the people in this country would be the best way forward for us.
Yeah, I'll address that real quick. Just the census question. It's really interesting. When Julian Castro was running for president, he was asked what he would do first day he was sworn in, and what he blurted out was redo the census. This was obviously a long time ago, and there were a lot of questions about the ability for completion and the questions around citizenship question. There's obviously still a real big question around how the Trump administration is trying to eliminate non-citizens from being included in the apportionment, which is the allocation of congressional districts to each state. And there's concern about an idea that they have of putting non-citizen population data into that census block layer, that smallest layer of the redistricting data, in an attempt, presumably in the future, to try to take on a Supreme Court decision that would allow for the drawing of districts and exclusion of the non-citizen population from district lines. So with all that said, there is real question about the census and how well it's been performed, and the fact that it was probably stopped sooner than it needed to be or should have been. And there is a way for the new administration to come out and, let's say they identify 100 counties or 500 counties around the country where they want to restart the count, where they could theoretically go out and start to do some counting again in areas where they have just really poor performance. There is also a potential for a failed census. And there's even in the distant, possibilities, a potential that they would have to redo the census in 5 years. All that being said, I think most people expect the census to be coming late. They expect that the new administration will, at some point here soon, identify some goals that they have and some processes that they want to see done in order to ensure that the quality of the final product is something that Americans can believe in and that did truly count everyone. But until we kind of get to that point, there's just a lot of unknowns. For the purposes of redistricting in 2021, I think it's most likely that we'll just have a late census data, maybe coming out as late as June of 2021. And a lot of states really hustling to get all this work done. It's going to be a real challenge to do this redistricting, this cycle.
And because Virginia has elections next year for the House of Delegates, for example, this is a really big issue for us. We have a very condensed timeline in which we could actually even have our lines for the House of Delegates redrawn next year, for example, that right now, typically our gubernatorial, our lieutenant governor, attorney general, and House of Delegates primaries are all on the same day in June. It's very likely that we're going to have House of Delegates primaries in August, which would be wildly low turnout, and we'll have the statewide primaries in June, but that only assumes that the census data is even done and turned around and given back to Virginia to be able to perform this in the first place. Because if not, the alternative to that is I then have to run for re-election in my current district this year, which would be, or in 2021, which would be just fine with me. I like my district, it's good. But the next year, I would have to run again on a new map in 2022, and then I would have to run again in a new map in 2023, or the continuation of that, because then at that point, 2022 would have been a special election. So you're talking about having elections 3 years in a row, and I know politicians love being the centerpiece of attention, but I am not that much of a glutton for punishment to want to live that hell where I have to raise $1 million every campaign. So no, I would very much prefer that those numbers get done this year. That would be nice.
And Tony, if I could just jump in quickly to just round it up about the impact for communities and really thinking about our undocumented LGBTQ community. I myself am adopted from Honduras. And so, this is a dear issue to me, of my people being out there. And in particular, the trans community, right? And just thinking about actually places like Northern Virginia, where we do have high concentrations of folks that we know are mixed status or, undocumented, and of course, people who are legal here, and what it means in terms of just the services for folks. And I think in particular, we're just seeing such an onslaught right now, especially in a pandemic, of poverty and health issues. And of course, unfortunately, in our trans community, violence against, trans women of color, that the fact that, they are actually talking about not counting a particular population has just a real negative detriment down the line in terms of what kind of services folks can get, who's here. I myself am on the board of a couple of nonprofits here in the local Washington area. And we know the people that are coming for services in our LGBTQ providers happen to be undocumented. But if actual federal dollars aren't going to programs that are dealing with homelessness and hunger and all the issues, we know that has a detriment for our people first. So this is more than just about lines and of course, people running, but this is also about, real lives because of what kinds of federal dollars can come out of census allocation.
Thank you, Raffi. Following up on that, Raffi, you mentioned, all in the lines objective in terms of eliminating gerrymandering. What are the different types of gerrymandering? Usually it carries a negative connotation. Should the LGBTQ community really be influencing the redistricting process at all?
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things to remember is we are not, just like Senator Antonio said, we are not monolith as a community. And in fact, I think in particular, we should think about this when it comes in particular for folks who are also LGBTQ and people of color, or people who are living in rural areas, or people who are experiencing poverty. One of the issues that we see is something known as packing, which is packing certain constituents into a district with the idea of actually diluting their representation. We have seen this in particular in minority majority districts, but also something known as cracking, which is literally splitting communities down the line. There's a community in North Carolina in Greensboro, which is the home of North Carolina A&T, which is a historically Black university. And that community is split right down the line, where students at this HBCU have different representatives because literally the campus is split. So they actually know that they are experiencing really what's known as a racial gerrymander as well, when it comes to their ability to have influence and really, have a say about who's elected, or when, I know the elected officials here on the panel are very responsive to their constituents. It's not necessarily the case in a place where your district is actually cracked or packed. And so I think for us as an LGBTQ community, we have to think about where we are living and what kind of districts are we experiencing, especially where there's cracking and packing. But in particular, I can also see it happening in places where it's a minority majority community. And so that's the kind of thing we are trying to make sure doesn't happen in the maps that are produced in 2021.
Thank you, Raffi. My next question is for Senator Antonio. Senator Antonio, Republicans control both houses of Ohio State Legislature and the governorship. What lessons did you learn 10 years ago that will be helpful to you this year? And what levers of power, if any, do Democrats have to influence the redistricting process in Ohio?
Well, thanks for that. One of the things we learned 10 years ago is it is not, no good comes from a group that huddles in a hotel room in secret in a bunker somewhere and then creates districts, which is what happened 10 years ago. As a result of that, and I've mentioned before that we had a referendum on the ballot, it was not the best, not 100% of what we wanted, but it was a step in the right direction. The people of Ohio were outraged. And so from that outrage, what we got was people understanding a little bit more about what gerrymandering is and what the consequences are. And I think they always have to go together. And so now where we're at is we're still in a very deep minority, and there's a reason for that because of the fact that the districts are so gerrymandered. And by the way, in Ohio, we also have an added insult, which is term limits. And what happens with term limits, and when you combine term limits and gerrymandered districts, what you get in every primary is the most extreme on either side of the spectrum that win those seats often, and then come to the legislature pushing everything to the outer limits of even party affiliation. So we also have that going on. The hope for us is that we've educated the public, that all eyes are on this process, and that there will be an open process. We have created a system where if there's not agreement, we've actually got a couple minority members on the panel making the decision when all is said and done. And I totally agree with Delegate Roem that legislators should be out of this. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get us out of it this last time. But in the future, I hope we are. We have a couple of opportunities where people do have input to push back and to make those district draw lines much fairer. And I think the public is really going to be paying attention to something this time that they only heard about after the fact last time.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Roem, as you mentioned earlier, Virginia voters recently approved a constitutional amendment establishing a commission process for drawing the lines of congressional and state legislative districts. What are some of the improvements you see in this process, and are you hopeful that this commission will produce fairer maps?
Well, we went from a process that is inherently corrupt to a process that is now slightly less corrupt. So that's improvement or something. We went from a process where you had 140 people having a say, or really just the people who were in the majority parties having a say in terms of, what was going to happen, to now a system where, hey, even though the process will be relatively open to a degree, you will still have 8 legislators who have been chosen by their party leaderships having a say. And if any 2 members of this 16-member commission want to scuttle the whole thing, they can. And then that'll eventually send it to the Republican-controlled Supreme Court, and they'll just appoint a special master at their behest. So we have to understand a few things, that when we talk about the concept of what independent redistricting is not bipartisan redistricting. It is not tripartisan redistricting. It is independent, completely separate from people like Senator Antonio and myself. We should not have a role in this. It's just, it's so flagrantly wrong. And so I'm not thrilled about this new system at all. In 2019, we had to basically vote for this thing on 2 occasions. 2019, I voted to keep the legislative process going so that we could have our final vote in 2020, because I was told that, oh, Danica, the enabling legislation is going to fix all the problems with the state constitutional amendment here. And out of respect for a lot of people, I voted for continuing that legislative process the first time, but I told them this does not guarantee how I'm going to vote in my final one. I want to see what this enabling legislation does. And well, we saw it. I didn't like it. And so here we are. But then the constitutional amendment came out, and during special session, we had to deal with that. And what the floor speech that I gave, the virtual floor speech that I gave during this, was centered on the idea that, look, I do not like the fact that we have legislators picking constituents. I think this is a huge problem. And of our 8 legislative members, 6 are white, 2 are black. This is clearly also another issue that's going to be, constantly coming up, and no other minority communities are represented. So that said, and I think it's like 5 men and 3 women, even though we have more women in Virginia than we have men. Again, go figure, right? Immediately we see the problems. But the voters voted, and we have to have something that implements this. And so what the governor basically worked with us on during special session that we voted for, and we passed 99-0 in the House of Delegates, at least laid out some criteria that make it a more equitable form of corruption, if not still inherently corrupt.
Thank you, Delegate. Paul, turn it over to you. Could you compare California's commission to others across the country, and how you see it being the gold standard or not as compared to other independent commissions?
Yeah, so definitely there are different kinds of commissions. As Delegate Roem mentioned, not the best commission that you've got there. There are other commissions that are politically appointed, which inherently create problems. There are some commissions that are doing the work of the elected officials and kind of giving them the cover so that they can have their lines and not have the responsibility for the gerrymander. So there are definitely types of commissions out there that are problematic. In California, we have a commission, just like the one they're going to be implementing now in Michigan, that are truly citizen commissions. They are comprised of people who, they had an application process, they had an interview process, there was a random lottery, there was literally a portion of the process where they were pulling ping pong balls to randomize the selection. And then they did this thing in California, which they've replicated in other states and in local governments too, where they seat the first half of the commission and tell that half of the commission, hey, you need to have diversity. You need to have geographic diversity as well as diversity in terms of skill set and awareness of different communities. And like I mentioned earlier, the LGBTQ population can be a part of that. And they say, okay, you are the first half of the commission. Now go seat the rest of the commission, utilizing all the applicants who are qualified, and make sure that you're picking people that have the skill set. So one of the people in the pool is an expert in the census. Great, you can grab that person. One of the people in the pool was a social worker and has a real understanding of that. So we'll pull that person. One of the people in the pool is from, that other end of the state that isn't represented as much. So we can pull that person. And so those types of commissions are really honestly the best. They're independent. They're not just a cover for the elected agency, and that's honestly the best type. But there are still opportunities to influence redistricting when it's being done by the agency, either directly or through the media. And there's also opportunities when it goes to the courts. When it goes to the courts, you can be filing amicus briefs discussing the communities of interest that should be considered in the redistricting and why. So just because it's a system that's not perfect, there's still a lot of ways to influence it.
Thanks, Paul. Last question before we have closing remarks. What legal implications, if any, should be considered when thinking about LGBTQ plus redistricting? And is the creation of LGBTQ plus districts at risk of legal challenges?
Well, I should preface this that I'm not a lawyer, but I think one of the real, interesting things that will happen if we, someday do pass the Equality Act in Congress is that it would establish that, sexual orientation and gender identity are protected classes. And so it does advance, at large, our community having a claim. However, as Paul was actually talking to me last night about what has already been done in California, is that the arguments around protected class, especially when it comes to voting, we do fall into. We have faced discrimination. We have concentrations. We are a community in the sense of, we are organized and, sort of have a group association. So I think there is already a strong argument for, pushing our community as a community of interest. What I would like to see personally, of course, in tandem with that is the passage of the Equality Act. So there's teeth in that should opponents of really our community say, these people aren't deserving of an actual protection as a community of interest. So, those are my thoughts on it. And I'm excited that we are organizing in places like California and elsewhere so that we are making it clear we are a community that deserves, special consideration when it comes to redistricting.
Yeah, and the basis of redistricting really is about taking communities of interest and bringing them closer to their government, allowing them to maximize their voting power in elections. And there's really strong reason to put LGBTQ community right in that category of a key community of interest in the redistricting process, with a lot of legal claim, like Raffi was saying, to that, to that protection. And I think that it's going to be very important to be working this election, this redistricting cycle, with secretaries of state, state attorneys general, to really articulate that and build that support so that people doing redistricting at the local or state level know that they have that backing. Because if LGBT folks continue to be from marginalized, definitely minority communities, then it goes without saying that the representation
isn't always there to really pay attention and to advance their needs as well as their rights and their interests.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Senator. As we close out, I wanted to say, as people are thinking about their closing statements, when we're having this conversation at the 2030 conference, what do you hope will have been improved, and what can people at home do to get us there? And any final parting thoughts you'd like to say? Let's start with Delegate Roem.
Thanks, Tony. Well, here's the real grim reality that we deal with. When we're dealing with campaign finance reform, when we're dealing with redistricting, I guarantee you, Senator Antonio and I know this really well. We can be really altruistic as legislators on these issues and very much care about them, and voters not care about them at all in terms of, will it drive your vote? If it does not drive your vote, if it is not the thing that will get you out to vote in the first place, then you run the risk of just basically, as you see in Ohio, and as you have previously seen in Virginia, where you have Republican majorities that just, their constituents don't care. Their base doesn't care if they pack districts because they want to consolidate power. For them, that's actually an asset. It's actually a feature instead of a flaw. And that is a really big challenge that we have, is, will people care enough about these mundane things, that actually have a world of giant consequence to them?
Senator Antonio?
Yeah, that's such an excellent point. And I think I'll go back to what I said probably at the beginning is, so if we don't connect the dots, and sometimes it's up to Delegate Roem and myself and other elected officials to connect the dots for our constituents, to say, if they make the decision on where you are in a district, you don't have a voice. You may not have a voice. It's up to us to connect the dots and to continue the conversation around the education points. And as far as caring goes, the most effective way I think that we end up being able to get the message across is going back to working in coalition, where it's amplified, both the necessity of what it means to be represented in districts and not have gerrymandering or selective gerrymandering that actually works to our benefit. It has to be a group effort. It has to be done, I think, in coalition, because ultimately, if we can say, look, we're all going to win here, then I think that's the most powerful message we can have. Thanks.
Thank you. Raffi?
Yeah, I would say, what we're building at All on the Line is a movement, is a national movement that I hope is, still around in 2030, 40, 50, beyond. And that's about making sure that people are part of these processes, and that includes the LGBTQ community. So a way that folks can be part of that movement is to join us. Please check us out at allontheline.org. And understand that, we are doing work throughout the country, and we are specifically working in 9 target states that are listed, including, as I mentioned, Ohio, places like North Carolina. And I would really say, in parting, that, LGBTQ folks, we need to show up everywhere. And that includes in our state houses and at commissions, and we need to be out and proud. And as Danica Roem said, some of us, are representing many voices that might not be able to be there for safety reasons, et cetera. And so really taking on this challenge is part of the equality work that we all are here this weekend to do. And so I am just super excited for the future, and in particular, knowing that we have so many out elected officials that we can really work with to see fairness come with its redistricting processes.
Last but not least, Paul.
The one thing I'd like for everybody to leave with is a name: Charles McCain. Charles McCain was the architect of the first LGBT community of interest in the redistricting process in the 90s in San Diego. And it's his legacy that we're building on. It's the work that he did, recognizing the strength and power that came from bringing the community together and helping build something that was kind of arcane at that time, like GIS and redistricting and all this stuff. The connection wasn't something that was readily made for a lot of folks. But now we have this tool, and it's literally laying at the feet of many activists who are in the community around the country and want to influence the political power that the LGBTQ community has for the next decade. And I really just urge everybody to pick that up, to reach out, to start working with folks that are doing the redistricting, reach out to Raffi and me and others that are engaged in this process around the country. And let's really make a mark on this redistricting. It's a huge opportunity, and I really hope that we can grab it and take advantage of it.
Thank you, Paul. Again, I want to thank my esteemed panel of colleagues here on this conference around this really important issue, and to thank Victory Institute for allowing us to have this conversation on redistricting. Here at Equality California, this is something that we're really going to be engaged in with Paul here on the call. If folks are interested in following our work that we're working in coalition with other underserved communities, please check out eqca.org or at EQCA on Twitter and Instagram. Again, thank you everyone for joining us on this important topic, and have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you.